Good to see you all. So I'm sure you all heard about the passing of a great loss for the Jewish people, a great figure, courageous figure in Jewish life. I'm talking about Rabbi Abraham Dr. Twersky, Avraham Twersky, who passed away from complications of the result of COVID, at the age of 90, in Israel. And it's fair to say that this person directly impacted, more than improved, saved the lives of many thousands of people. Many of them personally, through personal counseling, and many through the 60, and I read somewhere 70 books that he wrote. We have a number of his books in the library in MTC. One of his landmark books that earned him a lot of, well, I guess we can call it criticism, but he was courageous, was a book called Shame Born in Silence. He was the first one to talk about spousal abuse in the Orthodox community. Trailblazing book, a result of which so many lives were literally saved. And he was a drug addiction counselor, a doctor, a psychologist, a wonderfully warm, beautiful man, a scion of several Hasidic, including Lubavitch. So was his wife. She was a daughter of the famed Rebbe of Bobov. One of his early books, I'm holding in my hand, and I encourage you to get this book. It's called Generation. I hope that they've come up with a nicer cover in later editions. I should tell you, when I first started Shlichus, when we first began Shlichus out in Shomri, it's 1980, 81. There weren't a dearth, there weren't a lot of books in English that I could suggest people to read who were just expressing an interest in Yiddishkeit and were trying to inspire that. There were, as far as I knew, only a handful, literally one hand. But then things exploded after that. And today there are hundreds of titles. But one of the books then that I encourage people to read, and still do, is this book called Generation to Generation by Rabbi Twersky. Personal recollections of a Hasidic legacy. Much of it is about his own childhood. And it's written with such a warmth and such insight. It's a wonderful guide for parents, and even those of us that are no longer directly parenting. It's still a beautiful guide for life. And in his honor, Rabbi Twersky's honor, I wanted to share with you something of this book. He had spoken here in Montreal several times. He lived in Pittsburgh, then later years in Israel. He was very close to Chabad there. In fact, he was the president of the school. He's the author of, aside from many books, as I told you, songs as well. In Yiddish, many of them, like poems, and they're beautiful. Very musical fellow. As well as a very famous song, Hishia Samecha, Save Your People, which is one of our Rebbe's favorites. You may have seen the video. Rabbi Twersky instructed that at his funeral there should be no eulogy. That's the Chabad custom. There's no eulogy. Tehillim is recited. And he asked that this song, Hishia Samecha, that he composed, be sung. This song is world famous, and people don't even know that he authored it. That's how popular it is. And in Lubavitch, a very popular song that the Rebbe would himself often begin or instruct to be sung at the Fabrengens, often in connection with the then plight of Russian Jewry. Shir Samecha, a very beautiful and uplifting song. So what I want to share with you, what just happened here, what I want to share with you is, if you don't mind, a story, one of the stories of this book. Now, what he'd spoken earlier about was this very insightful, this is so tender and so powerful. How to criticize, especially children. Um, the big inherent, it's more than danger. The inherent problem with criticism is eroding self-esteem, putting the child down, and yet criticism is necessary. How do you point out errors without putting down the one guilty of it? And so that can be summarized really in 3 Yiddish words, which I would say and translate: es passt nicht, which means it's just not appropriate. So when you're telling your child about something, it's not appropriate. You really, at the same time that you're critical, it's not just true of children, mind you, anyone that you're educating, including yourself. At the same time that we are critical, we're also affirming, on the contrary, you're above this. This isn't appropriate for you. You're beyond this. It affirms our essential value, at the same time pointing out the failure. But that's not you. You're better than this. So this is a story that kind of involves, but there's a beautiful little twist at the end, one of my favorites. So with your permission, is that okay? I need a nod of the head to read this to you, because you could read the book yourself, I know, but you don't have the book right now, so I'll share it with you. So this is Rabbi Twersky talking. Mind you, you can hear his stuff on the internet. There's a whole series of short little teachings on all kinds of anger and all kinds of subjects. Just look him up, Rabbi Abraham Twersky, and I'm sure that you will fall in love with him, as everybody else has. He's just a wonderful, humble, facing, brilliant, insightful, sensitive man. Chassid. Here's his story. As a child, I was somewhat of a chess prodigy and was invariably triumphant when playing with men in the synagogue after services. One Rosh Hashanah, when I was 9, a rabbi from Chicago, guested at our home. And in the afternoon, when Father was resting, he asked if I wished to play chess. I was surprised at this, being under the impression that playing chess on Rosh Hashanah was prohibited. But the rabbi's assurance that it was permissible was sufficient for me. He was a good player, but I eventually won. That evening, the second night of Rosh Hashanah, I was told that Father wished to see me in his study. When I came in, he was studying, and I remained silent. After a few moments, he looked up from his books. You played chess on Rosh Hashanah? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. Rabbi C, whatever his name was, I guess C from Chicago, said it was permissible. Father looked back down to his books, slowly shaking his head in the negative. The message was clear. Even though Rabbi C was correct according to the letter of the law, it was not in the spirit of Rosh Hashanah to play chess. And I knew better than that. And he adds in brackets, if you say you should have known better, that's an insult, because it chastises one for his ignorance. You know better than that. He's merely stating an oversight and it's not insulting. And this was conveyed by his father, not even saying anything. Now the story continues. As I had not been dismissed, I remained standing in silence while Father continued his reading. Just consider this relationship of awe and love. His father wasn't a Rebbe, he was a great man, but this itself is just so enviable, isn't it? But you got to be a father like that, to respect of a child, like we're seeing in the story. Let's continue the story. Now listen, so, keeps on freezing. Rabbi Twersky continues, the remorse during these few minutes was most profound. His father had said nothing other than just shaking his head, which means you know better than that. And now the silence, as he's reading, and the child, Abraham, in his words, the remorse during these few minutes was most profound. There had not been any beating or even any shouting, yet I resolved right then and there that never again, as long as I lived, would I violate the spirit of Yom Tov, even with something that was technically permissible. In moments, Father looked up, and there was a twinge of a smile accompanying the twinkle in his eye. But you did checkmate him, didn't you? That little, now he comments, that little scene could not have been orchestrated more perfectly. I had done something wrong, and I was held accountable for my behavior. I sincerely regretted my misdeed. He wiped the clay sling. It was now time for some positive stroking. It was clear to me that Father would not have risked embarrassing me in having me admit that I had been beaten in chess. He'd asked the question because he knew the answer. And this meant that he had the confidence in me that I was a winner. Did I analyze all of this at the age of 8? He's 8 years old. Of course not. But although I did not understand the dynamics, the positive effect on my self-esteem was not diminished. One can admonish and chastise without crushing another's ego. Sternness need not be cruel to be effective. Similarly, correcting another's mistake need not be done in a demeaning manner. He tells now of a teacher he had in Cheder who would, when correcting him, he would say to them in his broken English, "You're right, you're 100% right. Now let me show you where you're wrong." So he says that was not an internal contradiction. The student had presented a very cogent argument, and that needed to be acknowledged. The fact that the argument was not valid did not detract from his achievement. And he concludes this little section, this is a truism that I've used many times. You may be 100% right, yet I can show you where you can also be wrong. So you're getting a taste of this wonderful, wonderful book, which as I'm reading it to you, I've resolved to read it again because it was a long time since I read it and found it on the shelf in MTC. All right. Part A, part B of our discussion this morning on this week's parsha, which, as you probably know, is the account of the giving of the Torah. And here too, I want to highlight one of the great heroes of our people. I was going to say our generation. She is actually the previous generation, and arguably, her impact. Not arguably, this is true. Her impact and influence is unequaled. I'm talking about someone you may have heard of, Sara Schneier. Have you heard of Sara Schneier? All right, let me tell you about her. Sara Schneier, just briefly, there's books written about her. So very briefly, she lived in Poland, born into a Hasidic home with parents who were Belzer Hasidim. They were Hasidim of a very, very famous rabbi in Galicia, in Poland, Rabbi Aaron of Belz, Rabbi Aaron Rokeach. And I should actually quote from her diary. She wrote a diary. Let me just fast forward without keeping you in suspense. She revolutionized education of girls. She was the founder of the Beth Yaakov schools for girls. And her story is magnificent and incredibly inspiring. I should tell you, she married, was divorced early. It's not sure whether because her husband wasn't observant enough or there weren't children. We don't know exactly why. Maybe some people do. She married later in life but never had children. She died of cancer at a young age in 1935. But her influence, she literally transformed Jewish. She contributed to the survival of Jewry, and I'm not exaggerating matters. She saw in Poland then, as the government was mandating sex education, her friends becoming knowledgeable and educated, but their Jewish education it simply wasn't there. Whatever they picked up at home and were taught barely to read and very unsophisticated, and they were drifting. These girls were drifting, and she realized their need. Yiddishkeit had to be taught to them in a way that was like her brothers. And she lamented the Rakam Yom Tov, and her brothers and father would go to the respective rebbes of Ger, Belz, Bobov, and learn Torah and come back inspired. And the girls were just in a different world. And she describes in one of her, in a section in her diary, which I don't have here, I recall the gist of it. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Shul. In the women's section, they can hardly hear what's going on. The old women are crying. The younger generation doesn't know why. The middle generation is somehow, praying in the very primitive or simple way that they can, not knowing the translation of the words. And the girls are outside chatting and talking, and completely disconnected from what was going on. And so she started to self-educated, encouraged by her father, but self-educated, and she started to teach. And then because of World War I, moved to Vienna, and in Vienna, she met a disciple of Rabbi Shamshon of Fall Hirsch for another time from Germany, who advanced and created schools where there was secular education as well as Jewish education, both sophisticated. It was critical, necessary in Germany because of the conditions there. It was resisted by Polish leadership, but she heard this. We need this model here. And there was some resistance, but she did get the blessing from the Belzer Rebbe, 2 words. He said blessing and success to her. Although he did, and she founded schools. I should just tell you, by 1909, 250 schools throughout Poland, Beth Yaakov, Beth Jacob, and some 4,000 students. Mushroomed, and got support immediately by the great Rebbes and the Aguda, which was an organization of the Orthodox leadership. It was quickly embraced. And there are Beth Jacob schools all over the world, of course, here in Montreal. In Russia, Chabad started its own thing, although really after Russia. Beth Rivka, a similar model, teaching Torah, sophisticated to girls. She was the first one to start a seminary, schools to teach girls post-high school how to become teachers. And she called it a teaching seminary. Now it's just called seminary, SEM. Throughout the world, the girls would call going to seminary. Really, it just means a teaching academy, but it's her original teaching seminary that she established and revered and loved, by thousands. Her story is amazing. And there are, I know, books written just about, probably just called Sara Schneier, maybe other names. I don't have the book. We used to have in the library in MTC. I don't recall seeing it for many years. Her biography, extremely inspiring. What one woman literally transformed. Not just education, it's not the issue here. You know more, you know less. We're talking about identity, inspiration, bulwark against assimilation, inspired women, what kind of education they're giving their children. I mean, the impact is almost incalculable to recognize, to appreciate what this one person had done for generations, starting in 1917. Why am I telling you this? Because the name of the school that she called her first school, and then mushroomed, and people came to her, ask her to open chapters in different cities throughout Poland. She traveled constantly. She called it Beis Yaakov, House of Jacob. And why? From this week's parsha. Let me share with you the verse, which is the inspiration for the Beth Jacob schools and other schools like it that have emulated her model to one degree or another. Not everybody embraced it fully. Not all communities. Nobody stood in opposition, but not everybody encouraged their communities, their daughters to attend such schools, and there's still a carryover today. What I'm saying is, in every segment of Jewish life today, even the most extreme right, there are girls' schools, not necessarily as sophisticated in terms of the way they teach as the Beth Jacob model or the Beth Rivka or the other models that her school had spawned. But bottom line is, she changed the whole thinking. Women need to be empowered and educated and inspired for themselves and for the survival of Jewry. We owe her an infinite debt of thanks. So, what's the verse that inspired the name of these schools? So this week's parsha, it's chapter 19. Chapter 19, verse 3. The Jewish people have arrived at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. It was Chodesh Sivan, and Moishe Rabbeinu Moses ascends to God, and the Eternal, I'm translating, calls out to him from the mountain, saying, and these are the immortal words, Koisoymar lebeis Yaakov v'saged livnei Yisrael. So you should say to the house of Jacob and relate to the sons of Israel. Now, the obvious question, we're talking about the Jewish people. Why are they getting two appellations, two descriptions? House of Jacob, sons of Israel. And our sages say in the Talmud that house of Jacob, the women, sons of Israel, the men. So right there, you have why she called her school Bet Yaakov or Beis Yaakov or Beth Jacob, because that's the house of Jacob refers to the Jewish women as per God's instruction to Moses. It is the first instruction, the very first opening words in preparation for the giving of the Torah 6 days later. So much is to be noted. First of all, God tells Moishe Rabbeinu first speak to the women. That's an incredible message right there. First the women, then the men. He is saying, as if to say, in other words, if the women don't agree, then don't bother going further. They are the custodians of Judaism ultimately. So first the women, then the men. Moreover, as I want to talk about a little bit this morning, the women are called the home. Now, all of us, having learned some Chassidus, already know that this goes far beyond, her place is the home. It goes far beyond even she's the one that creates the Jewish home. Far beyond that. Although that's all true. It's because the whole purpose of life and creation is home. That the world become a home for God. That's why I'm giving you the Torah, says God. And you convey this to the women first. Because they are the ones that play the critical role in the reason I created life. And I'm giving the Torah. I want you to make this world a home for me. Bet Yaakov. We'll revisit that in a moment. I just want to go a bit further in analyzing the words here. V'taged lebnei Yisrael, and then relate to the sons of Israel, secondary. Now note another difference. Not just the order, women first, then men, not just in addition to house of Israel, house of Jacob, sons of Israel. In other words, the purpose. The purpose of the giving of the Torah, which is making the world a dira, a home for God, is conveyed to the women. In addition to all of that, please pick up on this too. When it comes to the women, it's a different instruction. Tomar, you shall say. When it comes to the men, taged, which I translated as you shall relate or tell. But what is the difference? Sarashi says, Tomar implies something soft. Lashon Raka. Taged implies something brittle. Hear the words of Rashi. I'll translate directly. First, he points out Bet Yaakov, these are the women. So talk to them, Balashon Raka, in a soft language. We'll soon explain what this means. And tell the sons of Israel, quoting Rashi now, classic commentary, state explicitly to the men punishments and details. Now, how's this conveyed in the word v'taged? Because the word taged has the same root as the word gid, which means a bitter herb. So matters that are harsh, like bitter herbs, a bitter kind of a herb. So what's being conveyed here? So traditionally, the way this has been understood, and I want to share the understanding of this in the light of Chassidus, but traditionally, the difference is be easy on the women. Don't give them all of the severe consequences. A woman's nature is more sensitive. So don't go into all of the detail. It's enough just the general outline. Elsewhere, our sages say it means the general principles. Another distinction. Women give the general principles. Men give all of the detailed information and consequences and so on. So traditionally, it's kind of women are getting less. Because women, traditional perspective, more sensitive, less educated, not able to absorb so much detail and knowledge. So just give them the general outline. The men go into the details. That's been the traditional understanding of the distinction between the men and the women. In the light of Chassidus, the reverse is true. As we see almost each week, in the light of Chassidus, there's a light that turns on and an entirely revolutionary new approach, deeper understanding. And that is as follows. Briefly, Rashi says you're to tell the men the punishments and the details, which means for the guy, and again, this is traditional also, within our new insight, there's an evolution as well as we get closer and closer to Mashiach. But guys, it's about performance and results. There's reward, there's punishment. That's how males are built. They're defined by things, by performance, by acquisitions. Everything is about, so what does it lead to? If a discussion to lead to a desired result or any result, then what's the point? He comes home from work. The last thing he wants to do is talk about what happened at work, because what's the point? Not solving any of the problems he faced. So he'd rather sit in front of the TV and watch the football game and chill out. She wants to share the day and wants to hear about his day. Meaning, in relationships, I'm going to say kind of harsh words, but I don't mean this as black and white as it sounds. I just said a moment ago, the closer we get to Mashiach's coming, the more the unity, but we're separating men and women now for purposes of clarity and for purposes of understanding where we need to go and where we are going. So for him, relationship is also a give and a take. I give this, I give you this, you give me that. For her, the relationship is sharing self. Not things, performances, contributions, but it's about sharing self. So herein lies the distinction between the male approach to Judaism and the female. For the guy, it's all about the result. Scholar, heaven, reward, punishment. And for the woman, it's more about the relationship with God. God sharing himself with us and us with him and becoming one. Not about the acquisition or performance or gain of things whatever they might be. And that's conveyed here by God saying, you don't talk about the punishments. They don't need that motivation. This isn't about do this or you will get. This isn't a business, as it is kind of for the guy who needs to learn the feminine dimension. That's what Hasidus came along. Hasidus is the feminine dimension of the Torah, the Kabbalah, preparing us for Mashiach, for the ultimate realization of the purpose, which is a home. A home isn't a business. Bet Yaakov. It's not like the people in the home, they're being there is just for what they contribute. Father gives this, mother gives this, the kids get that, then you're welcome. If you're not, you're out. No, obviously, a home is not about performance and what each one contributes. It's about, as we always say, being. You are loved because you are. And it's about connecting to each other, husband and wife in the deepest way, but even parents and children, not based on performance. I love you because you did, because you're cute, because you're funny, because you do well in school. If that's why I love you, then the kid feels threatened, obviously. You love the neighbor's kids more because they're better in school. And if you had it your way, you'd exchange us. No, the kid's got to feel when he walks into the house, you're loved because you exist. It's about you, connecting to you. Much deeper is husband and wife. That's the ultimate. 1 + 1 equaling 1, not 2, glued together by some shared experience. Each one contributes to, but 1 and 1 equaling 1. So Beis Yaakov, we're now in the lens of Hasidus. We're revisiting these ancient words now in the light of what Hasidus has revealed in the last generations or generation, particularly now Rebbe's teachings. Hashem says, and it calls them the house of Jacob, because this is my whole purpose. I want to share myself with you and you with me. We should be one in the deepest way. That's what a home is. And the ones that understand and will be at the vanguard of this redemptive process, both in Egypt when it all began, and the final redemption now are the women, Beis Yaakov. And the men, your motivation till you get to this realization is going to be your performance and your reward and so on. I've mentioned this before just to clarify matters. It all goes how this all begins. It all goes back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden as they were created. The first man's created from dust and earth. So every guy has this deep fear. He's going to collapse. There's really nothing there. He's going to collapse into earth. He needs props to hold him up. Comes from earth. What are his props? Whatever it is, his religious props, his physical props, his performance, his money, sport, everybody has their shtick. That's what justifies his existence, his self-esteem. Look what I can produce. And physically, in the creation of a child, he produces. It's external. Eve, Chava, doesn't come from earth. She comes from Adam. This fear of collapsing into earth, needing props. What does she want? She comes into the world and there is Adam. Her deepest desire is to share herself with her soulmate. She comes into the world as a shared two halves of one entity, as it were. She wants to share herself with a soulmate, with children, with others. Her relationships are all about sharing herself and with God. Being one with God in the deepest way. Oneness, sharing, opening up, and becoming one. Not afraid of being vulnerable. A guy is afraid to be vulnerable. He's afraid. He's got to learn that. And needs to be really assured that it's safe, but not given to expressing what's going on inside. Just not opposite. It's inside. You don't even know what's inside for the most part. It's all about just the props keeping him up. And that's enough. He's got to learn this. It's acquired. That's why he has to get married. She's not obligated to get married. He is, because he's got to learn this. For her, it's natural. Don't need an obligation. You don't have to be told to. The man has to be told to, because he would never do it. It's fine being alone. You want love? He's got his mother. You want intimacy? There are ways to find that too. It's got to be commanded. You got to get married, which means you share, you become one. The whole Messianic era is our marriage with God. That's what it's all about. As we get closer to that, therefore, this feminine appreciation is at the fore. But as you're hearing now, it's right there at the beginning. It's Bet Yaakov. That's what it's all about. So when Rashi says, speak to them in gentle terms, the generalities, this is not less, this is more. Tell them, convey to them what this is all about. It isn't about earning brownie points in the afterlife or getting respect and honor in this world and becoming scholars and writing books, although you got to do all of that. It's about a relationship. It's about a connection. It's about merging softness, merging the ego and becoming one with somebody else. Tell the women, the klolim. Klolim means the general objective of it all. For the guy given the instructions, he needs the manual book. So what do I do? Tell me what to do. What do I do? She needs to hear, okay, what to do. We'll see that in a minute. But open to the whole purpose of it all. And that's the home. That's Bet Yaakov. Not less, but far more. And not just more, that's the whole objective. A final word about the home. What makes your home a home, as we always talk about, it's not, again, not the functions that you do there. What makes your home? You have a bathroom in your home. Every home's got a bathroom. You got a kitchen. Every home has a kitchen. You have a fork and a knife and a plate and a faucet. No, it's not these functionary things. Buildings have that. Hotels have that. What makes your home a home is not the functionary stuff. It's what kind of faucet, where you placed your furniture, the color, the decoration. It's in the so-called non-functional things that are expressive of you, the homemaker, the home, and the people that live in it. So too in our relationship with God, as God wants us to make ourselves an abode for him and the world, it's about not just the big moments, the big mitzvahs, the big performances. It's the nuance and detail that we bring to the mitzvah. That even if you didn't do this, you still fulfilled your obligation, you still be rewarded, you're still an observant Jew, it's okay. That's why, friends, Hasidus came along, and it was kind of like very shocking to the establishment. Thousands of years we're putting tefillin like this. Our tzitzis look like this, the mikvahs look like this. Along came the Alter Rebbe, and then the Rebbe's after him. Yeah, but this nuance and this detail in the mikvah. No one ever said the mikvahs till now were not kosher, the tefillin were not kosher, the tzitzis were, no one's saying that. But now we're adding this detail. And the protest was, it was good enough. You fulfilled the obligation as mandated in the Talmud without this detail. Why is this important? The answer is, it's not about fulfilling obligations. You fulfill the obligation without it. In the basic way, the tefillin was put on, or the tzitzis were wound, or the kiddush was made in hundreds of areas, every area. The sukkah was built. Now, it's about the nuance, it's the furnishing of the home. Now it's about the detail. It's about the detail. That's what expresses you, is in the detail, in the nuance. That's what's your unique signature. It's you, this faucet, you like this shape, not another one. So it's not a logical thing, they're both functional. That talks to you. This shape, this color, where you place the chair, the table in the room. So too with Hashem. That's why the end before Mashiach comes now. It's not just enough to do the basic mitzvahs. It's how do we invest the mitzvahs with the nuance and the personal expression of self, the attention to detail. And of course, in relationships, it's just the same. What defines a relationship? The big moment, the big birthday, you bought the present. It's in the little engagements, encounters, the everyday conversations that don't make a difference to the big picture. He's still a good husband if he said this once or twice, or he's in the habit of doing this or that. Give me a break overall. I'm this great husband, provider, and everything else. No, so this detail. Yeah, but it's in this detail that are you there for her or not? That's where it's expressed. Makes no difference to you, true, as to her. This tone, this word, whatever the detail is, it's all in the detail. Therein is the difference between whether it's about me and my obligation or it's about you. If it's about me, I can overlook a detail. If it's about you, then why? If that's what, if you're sensitive to this, then yeah, of course. So Jewish life, our observance of mitzvahs today, as you're hearing, is so much richer and deeper and nuanced because it's gone beyond obligation and reward, punishment. It's about the relationship. It's the nuance, the sensitivity to God's desire. God has pleasure with this detail, then I don't need it per se. But that's what then that's what it's all about. I'm a from observant fellow without it. It's okay. I'll get a wonderful place in the afterlife. If it brings you pleasure. That's where the relationship lies, where it's about you. So let's read these words again. It's amazing that it's the opening words of the entire narrative of the giving of the Torah. Arriving at Mount Sinai, God calls to Moishe. Calling, it's not often that God calls. God speaks to Moishe, calls to him. Call is expression of deep love. I'm going to share with you such a call that comes from a very, very deep place in God, the deepest place. Ko tomar lebet Yaakov. These are the opening words. Speak to Bet Yaakov, Beis Yaakov. Convey this. This is my deepest desire. The home. The reward and punishment, you'll tell the guys in a minute. But first I've got to lay bare what I want. And that's to be one with you. Okay, my friends. Yes, question. So please unmute yourself, Peggy. Go ahead.
I don't want to give the wrong impression with this question because I really appreciate everything that you were saying.
Okay.
But I do have a question, and it may sound nitpicky, and it's not coming from a place of feminism, but I'm just wondering why, if it's the women that were referred to, why does it say Beis Yaakov instead of Beis Rivka or Beis Rachel or Beis a woman? Why doesn't it mention a woman's name?
Yeah, good question. It's a good question. Actually, I should tell you, I was thinking of the question as I was saying it today. Thinking it at least very quickly because I'm talking. I'm sure someone's going to ask this. So thank you for asking the question. I think perhaps the answer might be, again, it's about devotion. So to say the name, I'm not saying this is the answer. I'm just suggesting something. I don't know. Beis Sara or Beis, then it kind of sounds like a self-promotion thing when the whole beauty here is about sharing self with another. So I'm suggesting that inherent in the name Beis Yaakov is this humility, is this sharing, rather than the gain, becoming, but giving. So maybe there's a better answer, but that's what occurs to me as I'm sharing this morning. Makes some kind of sense, some kind of, not entirely satisfactory. You would like to see Beis Sara.
Well,
I can't see, I can't see Sarah, or any of them just thinking it, talking further as you're asking the question. I can just say her saying, no, don't mention my name. And nobody let me just finish here. Let me just finish here. Nobody wanting to take that that title alone. But me, it's all of us. So it's Bet Yaakov. Maybe that's adds a little more to it. Just trying to imagine Sarah saying to God, what is my name? Don't single me out. Something along those lines. Yes, somebody wanted to say something to add to that?
Elsa.
Yeah, I just, the Jewish people are referred to as Yisrael and as Yaakov.
Yaakov, exactly.
And each one has its own, it reflects a certain kind of person when it calls us the people of Jacob or calls us the people of Israel. And I would think that is kind of where it's going. Like it's a sneeze thing in terms of they're not pointing out to Yaakov as the individual, but as Yaakov as the word for the nation. And that's why it's not a female name.
Exactly my thought too. Yeah. Like I didn't even think, if I may say, I didn't even think there was an option to say Bet, a feminine Sarah, Leah, Rachel. Yaakov, it's like what else I say.
What about Beis Rivka?
I still think it's a good question. It's a good question.
Two names that were given to Yaakov. So I would say
I understand that, but then why dichotomize the passage between men and women? Why not just say it's one aspect of Jewish people and another aspect of Jewish people, or one group of Jews versus another group? Why say women and men?
Well, hang on, but therein does lie the difference. Being versus doing. It's the feminine quality that the guy needs to learn. Hashem deliberately created not just a homogeneous human being, but two kinds, men and women. And what we're learning here is that the ultimate is the feminine experience or connection that men have to learn, and it's taking thousands of years. But we're getting there. In the words of the prophet Yirmiyahu, Nekeva tesovav gever, when Mashiach will come, the female will transcend the male. So therefore, it's really part of the big whole picture that God wants, and that is to create initially division, and then for us to work towards unity, to overcome division and create unity. But your question still stands, and we're suggesting some kind of answer, but still, it's a good question.
Thank you, Rabbi. This is very nice.
All right, folks, have a wonderful day and week.
You too.
I hope
Thank you, Rabbi.
I want us to remember to be inspired by examples of Rabbi Twersky. Again, this book, if you can get a hold of it, I'll show you again, generation to generation. Here's a picture of him, by the way, on the inside cover, if you haven't seen a picture of him. Where are we? There we go. And by all means, look up Sara Schneier for more inspiration, most inspirational figure